What on earth is this luggage? What do you mean? I'm going to live here. My son's high-rise apartment is mine. I feel dizzy at the sight of my mother-in-law, who proudly brings in a large amount of luggage while I'm on a business trip. Luke, what is this? I didn't hear about this. Then my husband says, scratching his head in annoyance. It's fine. We have extra rooms. I can't live together. I've reached my limit. I desperately appealed to my husband, but he looked at me with cold eyes and said, if you have a complaint, you should leave. That's right. Luke and I are going to live here, so the nuisance should leave quickly. My husband and mother-in-law say this as if it's a matter of course. I can't believe they would do such an ambush when I've been putting up with their sarcasm so far. And to top it all off, they tell me to leave. I don't need such a husband anymore. I gritted my back teeth in frustration, but I told them in a very calm tone. I understand. I will leave this house. If you understand, pack your things quickly and leave. It will be interesting to see how you live from now on. I packed my things while listening to my mother-in-law's laughter. My husband was trying not to look at me, but I clearly told him. Luke, are you sure about this? Then my husband looked at me and let out a smirk. You'll probably come back soon. Cool your head. I left the tower apartment while being watched by my mother-in-law, who was grinning. My name is Grace. I turned 35 this year. I've been married to my husband, Luke, for 6 years. We are a working couple with different jobs. Luke, who used to work for a securities company, quit 2 years ago and is now a day trader at home. I was working at a jewelry shop, which was my dream since I was a child. One day before going to work, I spoke to Luke, who was leisurely drinking coffee. Luke, I'm going to work. Can you do the laundry? Huh? I'm busy. Luke said with a bothered expression, and I was annoyed. I'm doing all the other housework, so it's okay to do that much. You think I'm taking it easy because I work from home? I'm not going to do it. Just as I was about to retort, the living room door opened. Hey, Grace. I've been listening for a while now, but what do you mean by trying to get Luke to do housework? Suddenly appearing was my mother-in-law, who was supposed to be living separately nearby. What brings you here all of a sudden? My mother-in-law glared at me as I asked in a trembling voice. Then my husband casually said, oh, by the way, I gave my mom the key to this apartment. What? Why would you do such a thing on your own? As I tried to blame my husband, my mother-in-law glared at me and said, do you have a problem with that? Besides, it's strange for a wife to make her husband do housework, Grace. You should be doing it properly. That's right, Mom. Tell her more. My husband also joined in with my mother-in-law, grinning. You're not even earning much, but you're a cheeky wife. Being blamed like this, all I could do was bite my lip. I understand. I'll do it when I get back, so please leave it. That's right. A wife should be obedient to her husband. I turned my eyes away from my satisfied mother-in-law and left the house. My problem is this mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, who has been widowed by her husband and lives alone nearby, seems to be proud of Luke, who graduated from a top university and still adores him. She didn't seem to like me from the beginning of our marriage, and has been making sarcastic remarks about me, but Luke has never sided with me when I was attacked by my mother-in-law. I realized after getting married that Luke, who was praised and raised by his mother, has a high pride and is a bit of a show-off. On top of that, he's a bit of a mama's boy, and if I complain about my mother-in-law, he immediately gets in a bad mood. I can't believe he even gave her the key to our apartment. I'm sure my mother-in-law will start coming and going frequently from now on. Just thinking about it makes me feel depressed. After that, as expected, my mother-in-law started to come to our house frequently. She always complains about the housework I do, and sticks to Luke all day long. This life continued, and I was completely exhausted. One day, it was my mother-in-law's birthday, and I was heading to my mother-in-law's house. My steps were heavy, but I had to fulfill my obligation. My husband had an errand and was out, so I went to my mother-in-law's house alone. Happy birthday. When I entered the house, I took out a beautifully wrapped box from my bag. This is a present. It's a new product from our brand. Before I could finish my sentence, my mother-in-law clicked her tongue loudly. What is this? You're trying to get it cheap. You probably bought it with an employee discount, didn't you? That's not true. I hurriedly denied it, but my mother-in-law wouldn't listen. I don't need such a cheap thing that doesn't even fill my stomach. You're not very thoughtful at all. Even though I prepared it hoping you would be pleased. My mother-in-law started to nag at me with a glare. You're noisy. I don't like the fact that you're working at a jewelry shop or something like that. It's too flashy. That's too much. I'm proud of my work and that's a terrible way to say it. I snapped back in anger, but my mother-in-law still looked down on me. A mere saleswoman, proud? That's laughable. You're being fed by Luke. Return this useless thing and bring me a gift certificate. I understand. I put the present back in my bag, left my mother-in-law's house once, and headed to the department store. I'd like $200 worth of gift certificates, please. I bought gift certificates at the department store, had them wrapped as a present, and returned to my mother-in-law's house with heavy steps. I'm back. When I called out, my husband, who had arrived at some point, popped his head out. Grace, today is Mom's celebration. I've ordered some fancy catering. The dining table was filled with catering from a famous restaurant. What? I bought ingredients to cook. As I stood there dumbfounded, my mother-in-law interjected from the side. What are you talking about? It's obvious that this is better than your cooking. Luke, thank you. All I could do was look at the two of them with a dissatisfied expression. After that, we reluctantly sat down and started eating. Luke and my mother-in-law were having a good time talking, but I couldn't join in. When the mealtime was nearing its end, Luke suddenly brought it up. Hey, Grace. Isn't it about time we moved? What? Move? You know, a new high-rise apartment was built nearby, right? I think it would be a motivation boost if I could work in a place with a good view like that. Oh, that sounds nice. My mother-in-law also agreed with Luke in a dreamy expression, so I hurriedly said. Isn't our current apartment good enough? However, Luke clearly looked unhappy at my words. We have plenty of money to spare, so it's fine. Mother-in-law also glared at me and said in an intimidating manner. That's right. Don't go against your husband. I was completely taken aback and all I could say was. I understand. Surely if moving makes my husband's work go smoother, it's not a bad thing. And if I don't give the key to my mother-in-law when we move, it might be better than the current situation. I convinced myself of this and agreed to move to the high-rise apartment. While proceeding with the procedures, I said. Luke, I want you to promise me something. When we move, can you not give the key to my mother-in-law? Huh? Why? It's fine. I can't stand my mother-in-law's over-interference. If you can't do that, I can't move. Then Luke seemed to think for a moment and put his hand on my shoulder. I see. If Grace says so, I can't help it. I understand. I'll make sure not to give her the key. Thank you. I'm glad you understand. My husband seemed to be looking forward to the high-rise apartment quite a bit. With the promise not to give the key to my mother-in-law, I was able to prepare for the move with peace of mind. A few months later, we finally moved to the high-rise apartment. The high-rise apartment we moved to had a great location and a good view, and the interior was luxurious and high-end. For a while, Luke and I lived in the high-rise apartment alone, and we finally had a fulfilling day. A few weeks later, I had a business trip and had to leave the house for about a night. On the day of the business trip, Luke sent me off with a smile. I got on the Amtrak and headed to my destination, and I was busy with one job after another. I was busy, but I managed to finish my work and bought souvenirs on my way home. When I returned from my business trip and opened the door, I noticed a bear ornament that wasn't there before. It was the same one that was at the entrance of my mother-in-law's house. I had a bad feeling and went to the living room, where there were stacks of cardboard boxes. Oh. What's this? Then my mother-in-law, who was grinning from the back of the cardboard, appeared. You're finally back. I heard you told Luke not to give me the key. You can't shut me out like that. I panicked and confronted my mother-in-law. What on earth is this luggage? What do you mean? I'm going to live here. My son's high-rise apartment is mine. What about the house you were living in? That place was rented, so I've already canceled it. I felt dizzy at the sight of my mother-in-law, who proudly said that. Following my mother-in-law, my husband appeared in the living room. Grace, you're back. Luke, what is this? I didn't hear about this. Then my husband said, scratching his head in annoyance. It's fine. We have extra rooms. I can't live together. I've reached my limit. I desperately appealed to my husband, but he looked at me with cold eyes and said, if you have a complaint, you should leave. That's right. Luke and I are going to live here, so the nuisance should leave quickly. My husband and mother-in-law said this as if it was a matter of course. I can't believe they would do such an ambush when I've been putting up with their sarcasm so far. And to top it all off, they tell me to leave. I don't need such a husband anymore. I gritted my back teeth in frustration, but I told them in a very calm tone. I understand. I will leave this house. If you understand, pack your things quickly and leave. It will be interesting to see how you live from now on. I packed my things while listening to my mother-in-law's laughter. My husband was trying not to look at me, but I clearly told him. Luke, are you sure about this? Then my husband looked at me and let out a smirk. You'll probably come back soon. Cool your head. I left the high-rise apartment while being watched by my mother-in-law, who was grinning. A month later, I was relaxing in the apartment I had newly rented when the doorbell suddenly pounded loudly. Who is it? Hey, you. Open this place right now. On the doorbell screen was my mother-in-law, her face red, and behind her was my husband. I thought I would ignore it at first, but I decided to let them in so as not to disturb the neighbors. What can I do for you? When I asked with a troubled face, my mother-in-law snapped at me. What do you mean we have to leave that high-rise apartment? That place has already been sold. When I let it out, my mother-in-law's eyes widened. Sold? There's no way you could sell something that belongs to Luke. Something that belongs to Luke? What are you talking about? That high-rise apartment is something I bought. Huh? My mother-in-law, who had been staring at me with a calm expression, turned to look at my husband, but my husband was just standing there with a pale face. What is that? What do you mean? I sighed deeply and looked straight at my husband. Luke, didn't you tell her? My husband remained silent, avoiding my gaze. I turned to my still confused mother-in-law. You said it was a flashy jewelry shop, but our shop is a famous high-end jewelry brand. I am also the jewelry designer and manager of that brand. Huh? Manager? My mother-in-law opened her mouth wide and looked at me. I continued calmly. That's why I have some savings. By the way, the present that my mother-in-law said she didn't need because it was cheap is worth more than $10,000. $10,000. I returned it as my mother-in-law said. By the way, the catering for my mother's birthday was also paid for by Luke with my card. Huh? The mother-in-law turned to her son and said. Luke. Why don't you just buy back the high-rise apartment from this woman? You're a skilled day trader, aren't you? My husband said nothing. Holding back a laugh, I turned to my mother-in-law and said. Luke doesn't have any savings. What? Again, my mother-in-law was surprised and my husband just stood there. I calmly continued. He's been losing a lot of money due to failed trades. He should have almost no savings left from his company employee days. Isn't that right, Luke? Luke, that's not true, is it? When my mother-in-law grabbed my husband's arm and shook him, my husband sat down on the spot as if his knees had given out. I thought if I moved to the high-rise apartment and got motivated, I would succeed in my work. But, when I pressed my husband with a glare, he continued in a muffled voice. I failed again. I'm not sure if I can even afford to live with my mom, let alone buy back the high-rise apartment. What? Ignoring my mother-in-law, who was panicking, I crossed my arms and said, I knew it. That Luke doesn't have a knack for day trading. I thought I had to support him because we're a couple. Then my husband came crawling in front of me and apologized with all his might. Grace. I'm really sorry. Let me start over. Luke. What are you saying to this woman? When my mother-in-law tried to get my husband up, my husband shouted at her. But Mom, if we don't do this, we won't be able to live. I told my husband, who kept apologizing to me, in a soft tone. Luke, lift your head. When my husband lifted his head, his eyes were full of expectation. I continued in a gentle voice. You've always been told to get another job to support the household, but you never did. You never thanked me, and you never helped with the housework. I'm sorry. My husband apologized with a pale face. I ignored his apology and continued. You took me for granted and told me to leave. And now this? It's too convenient to you, isn't it? That is. I'm divorcing you. I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Grace. When I snapped at him, my husband tried to cling to me again, so I silently shook off his hand. My mother-in-law, who had been watching the whole thing, let out a mournful cry. Wait a minute. What will happen to the high-rise apartment and the luxurious life? That's obviously impossible. When I said that in an exasperated tone, my mother-in-law screamed hysterically. Then what are we supposed to do from now on? Why don't you live happily with your beloved son? When I said that, my mother-in-law seemed to be in a daze. My husband, who had been hanging his head, stood up and I kicked him out. For a while, I could hear my mother-in-law making a fuss at the front door, but it seemed to quiet down when people came. After that, my husband and mother-in-law, who had been kicked out of the high-rise apartment, seemed to have rolled into a shabby apartment that looked like it was about to collapse. My husband had to work day and night to repay the debt he had made from stock trading, and my mother-in-law, who had never worked before, seemed to have to go to a factory part-time. I hope they understand a little bit about the difficulty of earning money while working hard, but it's none of my business anymore. As for me, the jewelry brand is doing well and we have decided to open a store overseas. I bought a beautiful apartment for singles with the money from selling the high-rise apartment, and I am living a leisurely life. From now on, I want to live my life positively while cherishing my work.